On today's show, the Capitals fall in their first preseason game. Who stood out and who could use some more work? I'll discuss next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms, including the SiriusXM app and on YouTube. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the last 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. And the best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about how your Washington Capitals fall in the first preseason game of this early season. It's only preseason hockey, and they fell in the first game by a score of 6-2. And I think what's important to understand is it's very early, and it's a lot of prospects, a lot of young talent. So I wouldn't read too much into it. I'll give you my thoughts a little bit later. We'll talk about player performances of those young players that I just mentioned. What players really popped off the page and which players could use some more work. I'll talk about that. And then in the final segment, I'll talk about a look ahead, as there's not a whole lot of space in between games, as the Capitals will be back in action on Tuesday against the Bruins. But just to get it going here, talking about preseason hockey, and I love it. I love the fact that I was able to find the game on the NHL Network, as years ago, if you have been a follower of NHL hockey and the Capitals for some time, for the longest time, very few preseason games were televised. So I'm glad that the sport is growing, and I'm glad that it's available to a larger market, because you get a chance to see some of these younger players. And I talked to some people about my excitement about the games, and they're like, Dan, it's just preseason hockey. What's there to get excited about? There's a lot to get excited about in the regard that you get to see these players and their development. You got to see draft picks, some of that were selected this last summer. What do they look like playing with some NHL talent and players that they will potentially play with someday? So these games have a lot of importance. And the thing about it is, and Spencer Carberry talked about it, is that there's not a lot of time to make adjustments between games. Is like I say, they played on Sunday, and then the next game they play is on Tuesday. So there is no rest for the weary, is that they have to find a way to get back in action and put a winning team out on the ice. But I think the biggest thing to take away from this is these games, especially the first few games here, are about assessment. Especially this first game that was played today on Sunday is, like I mentioned off the top of the show, a lot of prospects, a lot of young talent sprinkled in with some NHL talent, just to ultimately kind of take the temperature of where these players are at. But it was good to see them back in action. Not so happy about the end result. I went to the Capitals Twitter page, and they said, if you want to find out the score, just go to NHL.com. It seems like they were having a hard time with it. And I understand it. As a Capitals fan and as an NHL fan, you're always rooting for your team and you want them to win regardless if it's preseason or not. But the Capitals struggled, and there's definitely some room for work. But talking about the preseason, in the first preseason opener, the Caps faced off against the Flyers in a competitive matchup, despite A valiant effort, the Capitals suffered a 6-2 defeat due to defensive challenges. And that's one of the things that I'll bring up right now is that we got a chance to see Hunter Shepard and Clay Stevenson. And some people might be saying, hey, I've heard Dan talk quite a bit about how great these netminders are. They didn't play that well. They gave up 6 goals. Well, what are some of the things that we know is that it was very young and inexperienced players for the most part playing in front of them. And a goalie can't do everything. They need stout defensemen and players out there that are going to take a lot of that pressure off of them. So I wouldn't read too much into the net-minding situation. But all things considered, there was some good, but a whole lot bad to the game as well. Notable moments included goals from Andrew Cristall. That was very exciting. The 19-year-old man who is trying to make his way. And we know for sure that he is either going to play with the Kelowna Rockets or he is going to play with the Capitals. There is no chance that he can play with the Hershey Bears. I'm going to say it is a very outside possibility that he breaks camp with the team and joins the Capitals, but I will say that he has taken steps forward. One of the biggest knocks against his game was skating, and I'll talk a little bit more about his game a little bit later in the show. But all things considered, just to talk about him here briefly, I think he looked very well along with even Miroshnichenko. Both players definitely were standout players for the Capitals, but the team struggled to contain the Flyers' offensive plays. And that was the big thing. You know, you take a look at the Flyers, they took control and they didn't relinquish it. They had a lot of power, and it's going to be an interesting Flyers team this year, isn't it, to see how much better they are this year than the season before. And you got a chance to see Matvei Michkov, one of the guys that was kind of circled as a possible player that the Capitals could have selected at the draft a couple of summers ago. But it's interesting to see how these players will gel, and it's going to be interesting to see, I know this is a Capitals podcast, but how, like I say, the Flyers and how much better they will be. The Flyers' young stars, including Joel Farabee, Jet Luchenko, Matvei Michkov, Morgan Frost, and Bobby Brink played exceptionally well. Farabee and Brink stood out with a total of 12 shots on goal against the Capitals. That's what I'm talking about, that you take a look at Hunter Shepard, you take a look at Clay Stevenson, they were under duress for a good chunk of the game, and it has to be hard for them. And, you know, they are netminders that have been in the league for quite some time, so they understand. They've played through the different rankings, whether it be, you know, with the ECHL, you know, the AHL, all the way down to college, that sometimes you're not playing with premier talent. But the thing that was noticeable out there in particular is that it has to get better for the Capitals. Again, with the understanding that it was a lot of younger talent out on the ice, it's going to be gradually more NHL talent. And by the time it gets closer to the start of the season, you hope that this team is firing on all cylinders. You know, to a certain extent, you take a look at the game this afternoon and you think to yourself, well, was it really worth it? You know, to in a lot of ways, some people I've heard already say waste the first preseason game, knowing that these guys won't be with the team. And I think the biggest thing to understand is that it was the first preseason game, and not to read too much into it. You know, and I'll talk in the next segment about players that need to step up a lot more. But the thing I'm going to say is walk away from this as an assessment. Take a look at the positive, try to learn something from the negative, with the understanding that you're not going to have a whole lot of time to change things. And it's going to be different players out there and that kind of thing. But what we want to see in these games is steps forward, that by the time the puck drops in the first game of the regular season, that this team is firing on all cylinders, that the best of the best is out on the ice. And, you know, watching these games, you know, you're kind of thinking to yourself, man, I wish I had a chance to see Pierre-Luc Dubois out there and Andrew Mangiapane and these guys that we've heard about. And patience, I guess, is what I have to tell myself, and I'll tell all the listeners of this show as well. And it's going to come in time. The biggest thing to take away from this one was just to see some of the players that we had kind of circled. How do they play under the big lights, on the big stage? And, you know, some players stood out, and some players, it was quite apparent that got outworked, and they'll probably be reassigned here sooner than later. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about player performances in particular What players stood out? What players could use some more work? I'll discuss straight ahead. PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you need to do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. And you take a look at it. Sometimes you're watching a sporting event and you're not that into it. Sometimes I'm guilty of it. So what you can do is open up the PrizePicks app and take a look at the options and pick on which players you think are going to excel the most. And maybe you'll just get lucky. That is what's so fun about PrizePicks. Download the PrizePick app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's LOCKEDONNHL on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. So if you are one of the people out there that's involved in HR, the hiring and firing, that kind of thing, you need Indeed. And listeners, this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your job more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about it on the Indeed or on the Locked On Capitals podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. You need to hire. You need Indeed. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team. Every day talking preseason hockey and the excitement that surrounds it. And, you know, it's a thing that when you listen to the beat writers and you see all the activity at MedStar going back into August, that you're waiting for this moment to finally see it moving in the direction of the start of the hockey season. And we took one big step forward with the first preseason game under our belts. And the other thing that's really exciting for me is to see the young talent and eventually the veterans and see how it all gels. But in the game particular today, player performances and debuts were a focal point of the game, with Andrew Cristall and even Miroshnichenko making significant contributions on the ice. If you can walk away from this podcast learning two things, it's that Andrew Cristall and even Miroshnichenko are next level ready. And you take a look at even Miroshnichenko setting up from Ovi's office, it definitely kind of gives you a glimpse into the future of what this team is going to look like, and kind of almost to an extent that Miro is kind of in a lot of ways Alex Ovechkin 2.0, setting up from Ovi's office in the game today, making those significant contributions. Cristall's standout performance, including a goal and an unsuccessful breakaway. He tried to go in, but tried to go 5-hole, but the goalie ended up blocking it, and it wasn't to be. But all things considered, what we got a chance to see with Cristall was the ability to see a breakaway and to see how his skating was and the progress that was made over the summer. And that was one of the things that really popped off the page to me. One of the big reasons that we know that he didn't go higher in the draft was his skating. And we know that he hired coaches to work on his bursts of speed, that kind of thing. I think we're starting to see that pay off, as on that breakaway, you got a pretty good glimpse on how he can have a real giddy up in his step. And he did that. He didn't find the back of the net, but it was still very impressive, highlighting his potential impact on the team. And the part I was excited the most about was the newcomers to the team. Terik Parascak, Leon Muggli, and Eriks Mateiko showcased their strength and adaptability during their preseason debut. And we're talking about extremely raw talent when we're talking about Parascak, Muggli, and Mateiko. But it was a chance to see their progress. Like I say, kind of just take the temperature, see where they're at, and see how long it's going to be before they're ready to go. When you talk about those three players I mentioned there, we know that they're a way out there. But what are some of the other things that we know is that Alex Ovechkin is under contract for the next 2 seasons. And how much better are Parascak, Muggli, and Mateiko going to be by the time Ovechkin hangs up the skates? This team is going to look markedly different in a few years. We know the promises made to Ovechkin that he wouldn't face a major rebuild, but, with 2 years left under his current contract, these are the players to keep an eye on, to circle in your mind. Just keep an eye on Parascak, Muggli, Mateiko, and also Cristall and Miroshnichenko, who are probably going to be ready, especially in Miro's case, sooner than the 3 that I just mentioned, but definitely taking steps forward. The trio consisting of Hendrix Lapierre, Ethan Frank, and Jacob Vrana encountered challenges during the initial days of camp despite their joint practice sessions. Lapierre struggled being on the ice for 4 of Philadelphia's goals and none for the Capitals, resulting in negative differentials in shot attempts and high danger chances at 5-on-5 play. And, you take a look at it, Ethan Frank, the player that I have high hopes for, another player that I think is a part of the next wave for the Capitals. And Hendrix Lapierre, we really need to see a whole lot more from him, as we knew that he grew by leaps and bounds last season from the season before. We need to see that production. Again, we can't be too hard on Hendrix Lapierre, as he was playing with inexperienced talent in the form, generally speaking, Ethan Frank, who has a lot of reps in the AHL, and Jacob Vrana, of course, we know is a veteran of the NHL, but also is not maybe quite where he needs to be yet. But that's what I'm saying. Taken away from that, we need to see more from Lapierre, Ethan Frank, and Jacob Vrana. But, one player to kind of circle in particular is Jacob Vrana, as we know that he is on that PTO, that professional tryout, that he can't squander these opportunities. He needs to hit the ground running with the remaining preseason games, or this great story that I've been telling you about is going to be for naught. I mean, it's a great story to talk about Jacob Vrana being on the Capitals on this PTO, but unless we can see more from him, then it will be for naught. Now, to be fair here, it wasn't a total loss for Vrana, as he was getting some production out there as well. If we take a look at the box score and to kind of see who's popping off the page, Jacob Vrana had 6 shots on goal. So not a total loss there. So I'm not saying that it was a total bust on Jacob Vrana, but being that line that he was playing on got kind of worked over, kind of makes him not look the best. But taking a look around the box score as well, Andrew Cristall, 3 shots on goal. Even Miroshnichenko, 2 shots on goal. Eriks Mateiko, 2. Taylor Radish, another guy to circle, who I can see kind of having a bounce back season with 2 shots on goal as well. So taking a look at it, there is room for growth out there. And, but for some of these players, they don't have a whole lot of runway. In particular, Jacob Vrana, he definitely cannot squander this opportunity. In a lot of ways, I don't know how many other NHL opportunities he's going to have. And the question that remains is that, say he's not quite good enough to make the big team, will he be okay playing with maybe like the AHL Hershey Bears? Those are the things to consider. But that's what we need. We need to see a whole lot more. Ethan Bear as well. If you can remember Ethan Bear, he was that big piece that was picked up last season with high hopes. And we know that he went into the NHL Players Assistance Program. And I read a piece by Sammy Silber in the Hockey News talking about all his struggles, that he struggled with anxiety and depression, certain things there. So when you hear that players are going into the NHL Players Assistance Program, it's not always what you think it is. Sometimes it's for, mental issues, those kind of things. But it seems like he's in the right headspace now. And hopefully we can see improvement for him, as I think that he is still a bit of a work in progress. And as we take a look at the blue line, Well, listen, where these guys are all going to shake out and fit in there, that is a big question. I'm happy that Ethan Bear is going in the right direction mentally, but we need to see him step up on the ice as well. Ethan Bear took on the most ice time, playing 22-22 and making significant contributions across three strengths. This game marked Bear's return from the NHL's player assistance program, although he was momentarily caught off guard on one of Philadelphia's early goals. He recovered well later in the game. So you take a look at Ethan Bear, and when I say better, he played a good game, but he's going to have to play better than the competition. And in a later episode, I will go over once again my projected D pairings. Where is he going to fit in? Is Ethan Bear going to play so well that he's going to be able to knock someone out of the deep pairings that are kind of sketched out there by myself and other people? That is the question. A good game. Hopefully he can grow that game in the upcoming preseason games here. The fourth line was led by recent draftees Eriks Mateiko, who showcased physicality but was penalized for boarding in the third period. Despite being a natural winger, Mateiko faced challenges in the faceoff circle, losing 10 of 12 draws. So definitely need to see some more work there from him. Terik Parascak, the Capitals' 2024 first-round draft pick, made his preseason debut and assisted on Miro's power play goal. He demonstrated control at 5-on-5 with Parascak on the ice, despite him not having any offensive zone starts. Another younger player in the organization as well, part of that, maybe not next wave, but even the wave after that, is defenseman Leon Muggli, with experience in the Swiss National League at just 18 years old, displayed his skills during the game. He played over 2 minutes on both the power play and the PK, in addition of 13:39 of 5-on-5 ice time. With Muggli on the ice, Washington had positive differentials in shot attempts, scoring chances, and high danger chances. So, you take a look at it, maybe ready sooner than later. We don't know. Again, it's one sample size in a vacuum. Looked pretty good. Is it sustainable? I guess it remains to be seen where he gets assigned to once the hockey season starts and how much growth we can see from him this upcoming season. So when you take a look at the box score, you're like, man, the Capitals played so poorly. And listen, there was a lot of things that were not the best out there, but we got a glimpse to see a lot of this young talent. A lot of it were, you take a look at draft picks from this last summer's draft here, just, several months ago. So you take a look at it. That's what it's about, assessing. Don't read a whole lot more into it other than that. All things considered, feeling really positive about Cristall, Miroshnichenko, also a feel-good story about Ethan Bear being back with the team as well. There is a whole lot to like about it. Talking about the net minding situation, I touched on that earlier. Hunter Shepard made 11 saves on 14 attempts, same goals for Clay Stevenson. So they both allowed a total of 6 goals, so 3 each there. Not the best, but all things considered, it's, the kind of talent that was in front of them. You got to think that when Hunter Shepard and Clay Stevenson are out in a situation, it's the best of the best on the Bears, or if they get bumped up to the big team, the best of the best on the Capitals. So I definitely don't want to be too harsh on Hunter or Clay, saving 11 of 14. That's what you got to do. That's all they can do considering the talent that's in front of them. Taking steps forward, knowing that it's going to be Logan Thompson and Charlie Lindgren on the big team, and those guys are waiting in the wings when called upon. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about a look ahead. Listen, there's not a whole lot of time. We're already talking Tuesday. There's another game against the Bruins. What's at stake for a lot of players, and what did Spencer Carberry have to say? I'll discuss straight ahead. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And that's the thing that I love about FanDuel. I'll watch these games, some of the games I'm into, my favorite team. I'm already into that, but there's a whole lot of football to watch on any given Sunday that, hey, maybe if I open up the FanDuel app and I put a little bit of money on this game, maybe I'm interested in a bunch of different games. That is what makes FanDuel so much fun. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So talking about a look ahead and how we don't have a whole lot of time to make adjustments. Spencer Carberry spoke about that in a presser that, he wished that, there was more time to adjust, but it's going to have his staff working on what worked, what didn't, what players are going to be in the lineup, what players are going to get cut. Yes, that is one of the things that Spencer Carberry said, that expect to see the first round of cuts tomorrow, which was Monday. And that's what it's all about. And, for a lot of these, it's going to be the young players. And then as it goes on, it's going to be the players that don't live up to potential. But you got to expect that it's going to be some of the youngest players on the team, some of the ones that were probably drafted this summer here, that will probably be on the move. Unless for some reason they saw something on the tape that they're like, hey, let's get a little bit more look at this guy or that player. That's what we're talking about. And it's just right into it. Before you know it, it'll be the start of the regular season. But talking about looking ahead, observations from the game highlighted Andrew Cristall's impressive performance, emphasizing his scoring abilities. The team also faces upcoming roster cuts and prepares for their next game against the Bruins. Details about the Capitals' preseason schedule and the start of the regular season is something to pay attention to, as there is a lot at stake for these upcoming games. And if you take a look at this schedule here, it's going to be interesting to see a lot of these teams that are vying to get better. You take a look at it, they're playing the Bruins historically. The Bruins have been a really great team, just trying to take it to that next level. And it's going to depend on what kind of lineup the Capitals have out on the ice, but you got to expect that as we make our way further and further along, that it's going to be more NHL talent. That's going to be the same thing for the Bruins. Then after that, on Wednesday, September 25th, it's versus the Devils, the 27th against the Blue Jackets, the 30th against the Blue Jackets again, and then we're up against it already against the Bruins. So not a lot of time to dilly-dally here and there, as it's going to be game one, puck drop of the first game, and a lot at stake. And as I talk about this here, a lot of excitement, and I expect a whole lot from this new batch of players, these quote-unquote risky moves that former GM Brian McClellan made. Are they going to pay off? Is Pierre-Luc Dubois going to be that guy that gets Alex Ovechkin going in the right direction? Is it going to be Andrew Mangiapane on the top line right wing, or is it going to be Tom Wilson? And talking about Alex Ovechkin, who is going to be his center? Is it going to be Dylan Strome, or is it going to be PLD? You got to think, to a certain extent, they're going to take quite a few looks with Pierre-Luc Dubois playing on that top line, being that they made a big trade, took a big bite out of that PLD apple. He's going to be on this team for 7 years. You got to think that they're looking for some kind of chemistry going back and forth between Ovi and PLD. But again, one of the things I say on the show all the time is not to pick favorites. I want the most qualified player out on the ice, whether it's Strome, whether it's PLD. We want to help the Capitals win games, of course. But another big thing in the equation is to get Alex Ovechkin to catch and surpass Wayne Gretzky. That's what it's all about. So he's going to need a really great supporting cast, whether that's, PLD and Wilson, or if it's Strome and Mangiapane. That's what it's all about. But taking this team to the next level. Listen, a lot of people around the NHL, a lot of other Locked On hosts, don't have any really high hopes for the Capitals. They think that they're not even going to make it to the playoffs, period. One of the things that I would love more than anything is to prove all of them wrong, and that they can make it to the playoffs. And there's going to be some stiff competition out there, as some teams in the Metro got better or are going to just be as good as they were last year. You take a look at the Rangers in particular. I don't think they took any steps back. In one of the interviews, the Hurricanes are an interesting team. They lost some big players. They replaced them, but some of those players that were replaced is kind of unproven commodities. You've got to take a look at the Devils as well. I think they're going to take a step forward, even though they're facing injuries here as well. That the Capitals made some big moves, and some players that are looking to for, this season and season to come. In particular, I'm talking about Chychrun, for example. I'm talking about Mangiapane, these kind of guys that they're talking about their long-term. How well do they mesh with the Capitals? Do the Capitals want them back? Do they want to come back? Those are all the big questions out there. And it's all going to depend. The Capitals are going to be facing and having quite a bit of free agency candidates that, and players that might not be here after this season. So a lot is at stake for a lot of different players. We can talk about the net minding as well. You take a look at Charlie Lindgren. You talk about Logan Thompson, both players entering into contract years. Same goes for Hunter Shepard down in the AHL, that things could look markedly different in years to come. Clay Stevenson could be that long-term answer. So I think all the players that are playing going into this season and how they perform is going to dictate how the direction that this team is going to go. Is it going to continue to be this influx of youthful talent from Hershey and the prospects coming up, or are they going to try to plug and play these different players via trade or free agency? A lot is at stake, a whole lot. And I think that this season, right now, the 24-25 season, is going to define and kind of change the direction that this team is going in years to come. Players that step up, they're going to have a role. The ones that don't, there could be quite a few different players. We already know that Oshie's on LTIR, Nick Backstrom, those kind of players. So a lot is at stake. And this season, right now, that's coming up, is going to be one to be looking back at for quite some time. We hope the Capitals can prove those people wrong. They can make it to the playoffs. Ultimately, it's all up to them. Listen, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Washington Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that are watching this on YouTube and listening to this on the audio side. You are what makes this show successful. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.